The cheap, tinny bell above the door of Second Chance Pawns didn't so much chime as it did rattle, a sound like dry bones clattering in a forgotten crypt. Isla flinched, pulling the silk dress tighter against her body. The fabric felt like a betrayal, a silken lie against her skin that was already blooming with its own secret tapestry of violet and blue. Outside, the world was a wash of gray sky, gray pavement, gray faces hurrying past the grimy window. But a single, defiant sound cut through the monochrome misery, the deep, throbbing rumble of a Harley-Davidson engine, idling like a patient predator. It was a sound of power, of freedom, of everything she did not have. She clutched the dress, its vibrant emerald green a stark contrast to her pale, trembling hands. It was the last nice thing she owned. The only thing of value Donovan hadn't already pawned, sold, or gambled away himself. He had given it to her on their 1-year anniversary, his voice a smooth, possessive whisper in her ear. "So you can look like you belong to me," he'd said, and she, naive and blinded by the initial charm that had long since curdled into corrosive control, had thought it was romantic. Now she knew it was just another chain, prettier than the others, but a chain nonetheless. The man behind the counter, a sallow creature with eyes that seemed to have absorbed the desperation of every item in his shop, barely looked up. "Whatcha got?" he grunted, his gaze fixed on a tiny television playing a grainy daytime soap opera. Isla unfolded the dress and laid it on the scarred wooden counter. The silk shimmered under the flickering fluorescent lights, a jewel in a junkyard. The man's eyes finally shifted, a flicker of avarice in their dull depths. He picked it up, his grimy fingers leaving faint smudges on the perfect fabric. "Nice," he admitted, a rare concession. "Designer?" Isla nodded, her throat too tight to speak. "Where'd you get it?" His tone was accusatory, the default setting for a man who dealt in the currency of misfortune. "It was a gift," she whispered. A memory, sharp and unwanted, pierced through her focus. Donovan, his face contorted in a sneer, yanking the dress from its hanger. "You think you're going somewhere? You're not wearing this without me. You're not going anywhere without me." The dress had become a symbol of her cage, a beautiful door that was permanently locked. The pawnbroker grunted again, unimpressed by her story. He held it up, inspecting the seams. "I'll give you $40, 40. The dress was worth 1,000. At least. A wave of nausea rolled through her. $40 was an insult. It was spitting on the memory of the woman she used to be, the one who might have worn such a dress to a gala, not to a pawn shop to buy dog food. "It's worth more," she managed, her voice cracking. "Everything's worth more, sister," he rasped, already starting to fold it. "That's the business. You want the 40 or not?" She thought of the dogs. She thought of the hollow, trusting eyes of the scruffy terrier mix who had become their unofficial leader. She thought of the way they'd cower when she first approached, flinching from every sudden movement, their pasts as bruised as her own. They didn't have anyone else. Donovan had forbidden her from getting a job, isolating her until her world had shrunk to the 4 oppressive walls of their apartment and the secret, sacred space of that derelict alley. Her savings were long gone, bled dry by his bad luck and investments that never panned out. This dress was the last resort. "Fine," she choked out, the word tasting like ash. 40 outside. The Harley's rumble deepened for a moment before settling back into its rhythmic growl. Leaning against the brick wall next to the pawn shop, a mountain of a man named Grizz took a long drag from his cigarette. His leather cut, emblazoned with the snarling wolf's head of the Serpents of Odin MC, was a second skin. He wasn't supposed to be here, watching a ghost of a girl sell her soul for pocket change. He was just waiting for the chrome shop down the street to finish polishing a new sissy bar for his bike. But he had seen her go in, her shoulders hunched as if carrying an invisible weight, clutching that green dress like a shield. He'd seen the faint, ugly shadow of a bruise just above her wrist when her sleeve had ridden up. He knew that shadow. He'd seen it on his own mother's face years ago, a ghost that still haunted the long, lonely stretches of highway. He saw the pawnbroker hand her a few crumpled bills. He saw her shoulders slump even further the invisible weight pressing down, threatening to crush her. He saw her walk out, her face a mask of numb resolve, and he saw her ignore the rumbling beast of his motorcycle and the giant sitting on it. She had a new mission now. Her eyes were fixed on something far beyond him, a purpose that burned through her despair. Grizz flicked his cigarette into the gutter, the ember hissing for a second before dying. He swung a leg over his bike, the engine roaring to life with a twist of his wrist. He wasn't going to the chrome shop just yet. Something was wrong here. The code of his club, the unspoken law that governed their violent, loyal world, was simple. They didn't abide predators. And he had the gut feeling he had just seen the prey. He decided to follow, keeping a respectful distance, the thrum of his engine a low, protective growl and the city's indifferent hum. Isla clutched the two $20 bills in her pocket, the paper already feeling damp from her sweaty palm. She didn't allow herself to mourn the dress. Mourning was a luxury, and she was bankrupt of everything. She walked with a singular focus, her destination a small, slightly run-down pet supply store 3 blocks away. The bell that chimed here was cheerful, a stark contrast to the pawn shop's death rattle. The air smelled of cedar, shavings, and dry kibble. It was the smell of simple, honest needs. She walked past the aisles of colorful toys and plush beds, her heart aching with a quiet longing. She went straight to the back, to the giant 50-pound bags of dog food. She did the math in her head. $40. She could get 1 huge bag of the cheap stuff, or 2 smaller bags of the slightly better brand that didn't upset the old shepherd's stomach. She chose the 2 smaller bags. Quality over quantity. They deserve that much. The cashier, a teenager with bright pink hair and a bored expression, scanned the bags. $38.50, she said, chewing her gum loudly. Isla handed over the 2 20s, her entire fortune. She received $1.02 in change. She hefted the 2 heavy bags, 1 in each arm. The weight was immense, straining the muscles in her back and arms, but it was a good pain. It was a purposeful pain. It was the opposite of the pain Donovan inflicted, meaningless, cruel, and for his own gratification. This weight was for them. This was for her pack. She trudged out of the store and began the long walk to the abandoned industrial park on the edge of town. It was a place of forgotten things, rusted machinery, crumbling brick walls, and a small, resilient community of stray dogs. She didn't notice the black motorcycle that kept a steady, block-long distance behind her. Grizz watched, his initial curiosity solidifying into a kind of grim respect. He'd seen women like her before, desperate women in bad situations. Usually, the first thing they bought was a bottle or a bus ticket out of town, not 40 pounds of dog food. He followed her past the last row of dilapidated houses and into the overgrown lot of the defunct textile mill. Weeds grew through cracks in the concrete, and graffiti covered every surface in a riot of faded color. It was a desolate, forgotten corner of the world. Isla paused at the edge of the lot, putting the heavy bags down for a moment to catch her breath. Then she whistled. It wasn't a loud whistle, but a soft, bird-like call. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, from behind a pile of collapsed pallets, a scruffy brown head poked out. A terrier mix with 1 floppy ear and intelligent, wary eyes. He saw her, and his tail gave a tentative thump, thump, thump against the wood. Another dog appeared, a lanky shepherd mix with a touch of arthritis in his back legs. Then a small, wiry creature that was a mix of a dozen different things. Soon, a pack of 8 dogs had emerged from the shadows, their initial caution melting away into an eager, welcoming committee. They didn't rush her. They seemed to understand the ritual. They milled around, whining softly, their tails wagging in a blur of motion. Isla's face, which had been a tight mask of stress and sorrow, completely transformed. A genuine smile broke through, lighting her up from the inside. She knelt, oblivious to the dirt and grime, and greeted each of them by the name she had given them: Scrappy, Sage, Bandit, Willow. "I'm sorry I'm late," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion as she tore open the first bag of food. "I brought dinner." The sound of the kibble rattling into a dented hubcap she used as a communal bowl was the only sound in the yard, save for the happy panting of the dogs. They ate, not with the frantic desperation of starving animals, but with a kind of polite urgency, as if they knew this bounty was precious. Isla sat on an overturned bucket, her hand resting on Sage's bony back, and just watched them. For the first time all day, she wasn't Donovan's property. She wasn't a victim. She was a provider, a protector, a queen in her own small kingdom of the lost and forgotten. From his vantage point on the street, hidden behind a graffiti-covered van, Grizz watched the entire scene unfold. The hard lines of his face softened. He'd seen bar fights, drug deals, and high-speed chases. He'd seen grown men cry and brave men die. But this quiet, profound act of sacrifice and love hit him in a place he thought had been calloused over long ago. He pulled out his phone, the screen illuminating the grim wolf on his cut. He dialed a number he knew by heart. It rang twice. Yeah, a gravelly voice answered. It was Riker. "Prez," Grizz said, his voice low. "You're not going to believe this. The clubhouse of the Serpents of Odin was tucked away in an industrial park, an anonymous-looking warehouse that concealed a sanctuary of steel, leather, and unwavering loyalty. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of stale beer, motor oil, and cigar smoke. Chrome gleamed from the bikes parked in a neat row, their engines cool, but still humming with latent power. Riker, the club's president, sat at the head of a massive redwood table. The club's logo, a fanged wolf's head coiled by a serpent, carved into its surface. Tattoos snaked up his arms and neck, telling stories of loss, loyalty, and violence. His eyes, a startlingly pale blue, missed nothing. He listened without interruption as Grizz recounted the story of the girl, the green dress, the pawn shop, and the 40 pounds of dog food. He told it simply, without embellishment, but the raw facts were powerful enough. When Grizz finished, the table was silent. Some of the younger members, prospects eager to prove their mettle, looked restless, unsure of the relevance. A girl selling a dress? What did that have to do with club business? But the older members, the ones with scars that weren't just on their skin, were quiet and thoughtful. They understood. $40, muttered a biker named Slate, his knuckles white around his beer bottle. For a dress that was probably worth $1,000. And she spends it on mutts, not just mutts, Grizz corrected, his voice low and firm. Her mutts. It was different, Riker. The way she looked at him, the way they looked at her. It was church, that word, church, hung in the air. For the Serpents, church was their weekly meeting, a sacred gathering, but also meant something more, a moment of pure, unvarnished truth. Riker remained silent, his fingers steepled in front of him. His gaze was distant, looking past the smoky room, past the years, to a memory he kept locked away. He saw his younger sister, Jenna. He saw her bright, hopeful face slowly dimming over the course of a year. He saw the way she started wearing long sleeves in the summer, the way she'd flinch if he moved too quickly, the way her laughter died out, replaced by a constant, humming anxiety. Her boyfriend had been a smooth talker, a man with a promising future and a hidden temper. Riker, young and busy with building the club, had seen the signs but had dismissed them as a rough patch. "She's a grown woman, his old man had said. Let her handle her own business. By the time he realized the rough patch was a full-blown war zone, it was too late. He found her in the hospital, her spirit as broken as her bones. He had handled the boyfriend, an act of brutal, immediate justice that had cemented his reputation but had done nothing to heal his sister or his own guilt. He had failed to protect his own blood. He looked around the table at his men, his brothers. They were killers, thieves, and outlaws. But they lived by a code, and that code was forged in the fires of shared pain and fierce loyalty. The strong protect the weak. That was the first and most important rule. This girl, this Isla, as Grizz had learned her name, was from the cashier at the pet store, was not his sister. But she was someone's sister, someone's daughter. And right now, she was alone, fighting a battle he recognized all too well. "What's the address?" Riker asked, his voice a low growl that cut through the silence. Grizz rattled off the apartment number he'd gotten by running the plates on a car he'd seen the girl get into a few days prior. a flashy sports car that didn't fit with her worn-out shoes. The guy's name is Donovan, Grizz added. Leased car, rented apartment. Lives large on someone else's dime. Looks like Riker nodded slowly. Slate, you and Bones run a deep check on this Donovan. Credit, work history, any priors, who his friends are. I want to know what brand of toilet paper he uses. Slate and Bones, two of the club's best intelligence gatherers, nodded and immediately left the table, pulling out their Bertaphones. Grizz, Riker continued, his pale blue eyes locking with his friends. You and me are going to set up a watch. I want to see this for myself. A younger prospect, eager to impress, spoke up. Prez, you want us to roll over there? We could just have a chat with this guy. Riker turned his cold gaze on the prospect, who immediately shrank back. Asha, you think this is a joke? You go in loud. You scare her. You give him a reason to take it out on her later. This isn't a bar fight. This is surgery. We go in clean, we take the cancer out, and we make sure the patient survives. We do it my way, quietly, until it's time to be loud. He stood up, the legs of his chair scraping against the concrete floor. The meeting was over. We're going to look into this, he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. And if he's what we think he is, we're going to introduce him to the Serpents of Odin's philosophy on hospitality. The implied violence in his calm tone was more terrifying than any shout. The mission had begun. The stakeout was a study in contrasts. Across the street from Isla's nondescript, beige apartment building, Riker's gleaming black street glide and Grizz's custom chopper sat parked, looking as out of place as wolves in a sheep pen. Riker and Grizz sat in a beat-up work van they kept for just such occasions, the back filled with tools and junk, providing perfect cover. The windows were tinted, the air inside stale with the scent of cold coffee and simmering rage. For 2 days they watched. They saw Isla leave only once, a quick, furtive trip to the grocery store where she bought bread, peanut butter, and a small bag of cheap apples. She moved like a mouse in a house full of cats, her head on a swivel, her movements quick and silent. Then they saw Donovan. He was exactly the type Riker despised. He strode from his flashy car to the apartment building with an air of unearned ownership, his clothes expensive, his smile easy and charming to the neighbors he passed. But the bikers saw the truth. They saw the way his hand lingered just a little too long on the small of Isla's back, a gesture that looked supportive but was a clear act of guidance, of control. They saw the flicker of annoyance in his eyes when she didn't walk fast enough. Through a long-range directional microphone pointed at the apartment's main window, they became unwilling spectators to the slow, grinding erosion of a human soul. They didn't hear every word, but they heard enough. They heard his voice, a venomous hiss, on the first night. Where is it? The green dress. I went to pick it up from the cleaners you were supposed to take it to, and they have no record of it. Silence. Then Isla's voice, barely a whisper. I needed money. The explosion was instantaneous. You what? You sold it? You sold a gift? The one thing I bought you that made you look like you weren't dragged out of gutter. The sound of something shattering, a glass hitting a wall. Isla's small, sharp cry of fear. In the van, Grizz's hand tightened into a fist, his knuckles turning white. Prez, say the word, he growled, his body tense. Not yet, Riker said, his voice dangerously calm, his eyes fixed on the window. We need the whole picture. We need to be sure she has nowhere else to go. The next night was worse. Slate had reported back. Donovan had a history. 2 previous girlfriends had filed restraining orders, both mysteriously dropped after he hired a slick lawyer. He had no official job, but was connected to a low-level loan sharking operation, acting as a collections agent for his uncle. He was a predator who hid behind a veneer of legitimacy. That evening, the fight was about the dogs. Someone in the neighborhood must have seen Isla and complained to the building manager, who had then spoken to Donovan. You're feeding what? A pack of filthy, diseased rats. Donovan's voice dripped with contempt. Are you insane? You're going to bring fleas, God knows what else, back here. It's over, Isla. You're forbidden from going there again. Do you understand me? They'll starve, she pleaded, her voice finding a sliver of strength. They depend on me. That's not my problem, he roared. Your problem is doing what I tell you to do. Your problem is being grateful for the roof I put over your head, the food I let you eat. Your only job is to not embarrass me, and you can't even do that right. There is the sound of a scuffle, a muffled thud, and then a long, choked silence followed by Isla's quiet, heartbroken sobs. In the van, Riker closed his eyes. The ghost of his sister, Jenna, was sitting beside him, her face pale, her eyes pleading. He had waited then. He had listened to excuses. He would not make that same mistake again. "That's it," he said, his voice flat and cold as a tombstone. "He's crossed the line." He picked up his radio. "Slate, call the brothers. Tell them to meet at the clubhouse. Now, it's time to be loud." Inside the apartment, Isla was curled on the floor of her small bedroom, the door locked. The lock was flimsy, more symbolic than functional, but it was all she had. Her cheek throbbed where the back of his hand had connected, a sharp, stinging pain that was nothing compared to the ache in her heart. He had taken her keys. He had taken the last of her change, the $1.02 from the pet store. He had taken her phone, smashing it against the wall in a fit of rage after the argument. No more secrets. He had hissed, his face inches from hers, his breath sour. No more talking to anyone but me. She was completely and utterly trapped. Her world had become a prison of 1,200 square feet. The window in her room overlooked the back alley, a sheer 2-story drop to a dumpster. No escape there. She felt a familiar, cold tendril of despair wrap around her. He was right. She was nothing without him. Who would want her? A woman who couldn't keep a job, who had no friends left, who spent her time with stray animals. The thought of the dogs sent a fresh wave of agony through her. They would be waiting for her. They would be hungry. Sage, with his gentle eyes, would be watching the path, waiting for the sound of her footsteps. The thought was unbearable. It was worse than the physical pain. It was a betrayal of the only pure thing left in her life. A flicker of defiance, small but fierce, sparked in the darkness of her mind. She would not let them starve. She would not let him win. Not completely. She crawled across the floor to the back of her closet, her movements silent and practiced. Behind a loose floorboard she had discovered months ago, she kept a small, pathetic emergency kit. A half-melted granola bar, a $20 bill she had managed to hide, and an old, cracked burner phone. She had bought it a year ago, a secret lifeline, but had been too afraid to ever use it. Its battery was almost dead, a single red bar blinking ominously on the screen. She turned on, her heart hammering against her ribs. One contact was saved in it. Help! It was a number for a national domestic violence hotline. Her thumb hovered over the call button. She could hear Donovan in the living room, pacing like a caged tiger, muttering to himself. If he heard her, if he found this phone, she couldn't bear to think about what he would do. Her fear was a physical thing, a cold hand gripping her throat. She couldn't press the button. She was paralyzed. She sank back against the wall, the phone clutched in her hand, feeling the last of her hope draining away. Then, through her window, she saw it. A flicker of movement in the street below. The 2 motorcycles, the black one and the custom chopper, were still there. They had been there for 2 days. She had noticed them, assuming they belonged to someone in the building. But now, she saw the men who rode them. They weren't just sitting there. They were watching. 2 more bikes pulled up, then a 4th, their engines cut with practice silence. Men in leather vests covered in snarling wolf patches dismounted. They moved with a purpose that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. They weren't a threat. Not to her. She didn't know how she knew, but she did. They were an army, assembling in the twilight. Isla looked from the silent, disciplined bikers in the street to the burner phone in her hand, its single red bar of battery a beacon of failing hope. A choice. A terrible, impossible choice. Stay and be erased, or trust the roaring chaos that was gathering outside her cage. The Serpents of Odin's clubhouse was no longer a place of smoky leisure. It had transformed into a war room. The redwood table was covered with a hastily drawn map of Isla's apartment complex. Slate stood at one end, pointing out entry and exit points, while Bones gave a rundown of Donovan's known associates and habits. The air was electric with controlled aggression. The prospect who had spoken out of turn earlier now stood silently in the corner, his face a mixture of fear and awe, watching true professionals at work. Riker stood before them, a general addressing his troops. "This is not a smash and grab," he said, his voice cutting through the low murmur. "This is an extraction. Our priority is the girl. Her safety is absolute. The target is Donovan. We separate him from her, we get her out clean, and then, and only then, do we have our chat with him." He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each of his men. These are not mindless thugs. They were brothers, bound by a code that the outside world would never understand. They were the monsters who hunted other monsters. "The plan has 3 phases," Riker announced, his voice dropping into a low, conspiratorial tone. "Phase 1, the lure. Donovan loves his car more than he loves himself. Bones, you and Jax will stage a minor traffic incident involving his precious vehicle. Not enough to total it, just enough to scratch the paint and piss him off. He'll come charging out. That's when we create a perimeter. No one gets in, and he doesn't get back to that apartment." Bones, a wiry biker with a network of scars on his face, grinned. "A fender bender? Prez, that's my specialty. Phase 2. The extraction," Riker continued, his gaze shifting to Grizz. "Grizz, you're with me. The moment Donovan is clear of the building, we go to the door. We get her out. No force, no shouting. We are the calm in his storm. We offer her a way out. If she says no, we fall back and reevaluate. The choice has to be hers. But I don't think she'll say no." Grizz nodded, his expression grim. He knew the importance of that choice. It was the difference between being a savior and just another man telling a woman what to do. "Phase 3, Riker said, and a cold smile touched his lips for the first time that night. "The education. Once Isla is clear and on her way back here with Slate, the rest of us will have a private tutoring session with Mr. Donovan. We will teach him about consequences. We will explain, in terms he will understand, the club's official policy on men who raise their hands to women. He will leave this city, and he will never, ever come back." A low, guttural cheer went through the room. This was their purpose. This was their justice. "He's connected to a loan shark," Slate warned. "His uncle. They might come looking, let them," Riker said, his voice like grinding gravel. "We're the Serpents of Odin." When not hard to find, he picked up his leather cut from the back of his chair and shrugged it on. The weight of it felt familiar, comforting. It was his armor. It was his flag. "Let's ride," he commanded. The clubhouse emptied in under a minute. The sound of over a dozen Harley-Davidson engines starting up in unison was not just noise. It was a promise. It was a roar of defiance against the silent, creeping evil that hid in quiet apartments. It was the sound of judgment coming. From her window, Isla watched the army of bikes roar away into the night, their taillights disappearing around the corner. A profound and terrible silence descended. Had she imagined it? Was it just a gang passing through? The hope that had flickered within her died, plunging her back into darkness. She was alone again. She looked at the burner phone, its screen now dark. The battery was dead. The chance was gone. Tears of frustration and despair welled in her eyes. It was over. A key scraped in the apartment's front door lock. Isla froze, her blood turning to ice. Donovan. He was coming in. The door to her bedroom was flimsy, but she scrambled to her feet and pressed her back against it, a futile attempt to barricade it with her own body. She heard him moving around the living room, then the clink of a bottle and the glug of pouring liquid. He was drinking. It was always worse when he was drinking. Suddenly, a loud, metallic crunch echoed from the street below, followed by the blare of a car alarm. It was his car. She could recognize the specific, obnoxious tone of his alarm anywhere. "What the hell?" Donovan roared. She heard him stomp to the window, then a string of curses that made the air curdle. "Son of a bitch. My car." The front door slammed open, and she heard him thundering down the stairs, his rage a palpable force. Silence returned to the apartment, but this time it was different. It was a vacuum, a hell breath, and then a sound that made her heart stop. A soft, gentle knock on the apartment's front door. Knock, knock. Knock. It wasn't Donovan's impatient, angry banging. It was calm, measured, deliberate. Who could it be? The police? A neighbor? Her mind raced. She held her breath, staying perfectly still, pressed against her bedroom door. The knock came again, just as gentle, just as firm. Isla, a low, gravelly voice said from the other side of the door. My name is Riker. We're here to help you. Please open the door. Down in the parking lot, chaos reigned, but it was a controlled chaos. Donovan, his face purple with rage, sprinted toward his gleaming sports car. Its rear bumper was now intimately acquainted with the fender of a rusted, beat-up pickup truck. A massive, bearded biker, Bones, was climbing out of the truck, rubbing his neck theatrically. Oh man, I am so sorry, Bones said, his voice laced with mock sincerity. This thing just got away from me, you idiot! Donovan shrieked, his carefully constructed mask of civility completely gone. Do you know how much this car is worth? I'll sue you for everything you have. I'll own you. As he ranted, other bikes had silently sealed off the parking lot's entrance and exit. Shadows detached themselves from the darkness. Jax, Slate, and half a dozen other serpents formed a loose, menacing circle around the scene, their arms crossed, their faces impassive. They were simply watching the show. Donovan, blinded by his fury, didn't notice the trap closing around him until he turned to go back to his apartment to call the police. His path was blocked by a wall of leather and denim. Slate just smiled, a chilling predator smile. I don't think you're going anywhere just yet, Slate said calmly. We need to have a little chat about your driving habits. And a few other things. Donovan's eyes darted around, finally seeing the circle of bikers, the snarling wolf patches, the cold, hard eyes. The color drained from his face. This wasn't a random accident. This was an ambush. Who are you people? He stammered, his bravado evaporating. We're the neighborhood watch, Slate replied, his smile widening. And you've been a very, very bad neighbor. Back upstairs, Isla was frozen. Riker. The name meant nothing to her, but the voice. It held no malice. It was steady. It was certain. How did he know her name? She thought of the bikers she had seen from the window. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of terror and a wild, terrifying hope. We know you're in there, ma'am. The voice came again, patient. We know you're scared. We just want to talk. Your friend Donovan is detained. He won't be coming back up detained. The word sent a jolt through her. She crept from her bedroom door to the front door, her bare feet silent on the cheap laminate flooring. She peered through the peephole. The distorted fisheye lens showed her a man who looked like he was carved from stone and ink. Tattoos covered his neck, and a scar cut through one eyebrow. His pale blue eyes seemed to look directly into hers, even through the peephole. He was terrifying. He was the kind of man her mother had warned her about her entire life. But behind him stood the other biker she recognized, the big one who had been outside the pawn shop. Grizz. He wasn't looking at the door. He was looking down the hallway, standing guard. His presence was a solid, reassuring anchor. They weren't here to hurt her. They were here for him. Isla, Riker said again, his voice softer now, as if he knew she was right there, just an inch away from him. We saw what you did. For the dogs. That's not something a bad person does. We don't like bullies. We're offering you a way out. Right now. You walk out this door, and you never have to see him again a way out. The words echoed in the silent, empty space of her life. It was what she had prayed for, what she had dreamed of. But it was here now, dressed in leather and smelling of gasoline and danger. Fear and hope waged a violent war within her. The fear screamed at her to stay hidden, that this was just another trap, a different kind of predator. But the hope, a small, battered thing, whispered to the dogs of the green dress, of the 40 pounds of food. It whispered that an act of kindness had been seen, and that maybe, just maybe, it was being answered. Her hand trembled as she reached for the deadbolt. With a click that sounded as loud as a gunshot in the silent apartment, she unlocked the door. She opened it just a crack, her heart in her throat. Riker didn't move, didn't try to force his way in. He simply stood there, letting her see him. His face was hard, weathered by wind and violence. But his eyes, those startlingly pale blue eyes, held a deep, surprising well of empathy. They were the eyes of a man who understood pain. "We're here to help you," he said again, his voice a low, steady rumble. "Are you ready to go?" Isla looked past him, down the hall, then back at the apartment that had become her prison. She thought of Donovan, of his rage, of the soul-crushing weight of his control. Then she thought of the dogs waiting in the alley. She thought of the freedom of the open road, embodied by the man in front of her. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Yes," she whispered, the word a key turning in the lock of her own cage. "Good," Riker said, a hint of relief in his voice. "Grizz, help her get whatever she needs." "One bag." We move fast. Grizz stepped forward, his immense size filling the doorway. But he moved with a surprising gentleness, his eyes soft. "Just the important stuff, miss," he said, his voice a deep baritone. "Whatever you can't leave behind." Isla's mind went blank. What was important? The clothes Donovan had bought her? The furniture he owned? None of it was hers. None of it mattered. Then her eyes landed on a small, cheap frame on the mantelpiece. It was a picture she had taken on the burner phone before it died, a blurry selfie of her surrounded by the happy, eating faces of her strays. It was the only picture she had where she was truly smiling. She snatched it from the mantel. "This," she said, clutching it to her chest. "This is all I need," Riker nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "All right, let's go." As they stepped out into the hallway, the sound from the parking lot grew louder. Shouts, the sickening thud of fists meeting flesh, a grunt of pain. Isla flinched, but Riker put a steadying hand on her shoulder, not possessively like Donovan, but firmly, protectively. "Don't look," he said, his voice low. "That's not for you. That's for him. Just keep walking." They moved quickly down the stairs and out a side exit, away from the main confrontation. A black van was waiting, its engine idling, with Slate behind the wheel. He opened the side door for her. Before she got in, she paused and looked at Riker. "Why?" she asked, the question that had been burning in her mind. "Why are you doing this?" Riker looked at the small, framed photo she was clutching like a holy relic. "Because my sister liked dogs too," he said, his voice rough with an old, deep-seated grief. "And because nobody deserves to live in a cage. Now, get in. You're safe now." Isla climbed into the van, and the door slid shut, sealing her off from her old life. As the van pulled away, she looked out the back window. She saw the circle of bikers in the parking lot, a ring of leather-clad guardians delivering a brutal, long-overdue sermon. She was free. The drive to the clubhouse was a blur. Isla sat in the back of the van, the framed photo in her lap, her body trembling with a mixture of adrenaline and shock. Slate drove in silence, occasionally glancing at her in the rearview mirror, his expression unreadable but not unkind. The Serpents clubhouse, which would have terrified her hours before, now felt like a fortress, a sanctuary. When she stepped out of the van, the bikers who had remained behind parted for her, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and respect. They didn't crowd her, didn't speak to her. They gave her space, an unspoken acknowledgement of the trauma she had just escaped. A woman with kind eyes and graying hair, the old lady of one of the senior members, met her at the door with a thick wool blanket. "Here you go, honey," she said softly, wrapping it around Isla's shoulders. "You're safe here." She led Isla to a comfortable armchair in a quiet corner of the vast room and handed her a steaming mug of coffee. The warmth seeped into her cold hands, a small, grounding comfort in a world that had been turned upside down. For the next hour, she just sat there, sipping her coffee, the low murmur of the clubhouse a soothing hum around her. She watched the bikers, these supposed terrors of society. They played pool, laughed at crude jokes, and tinkered with their bikes. They were a family, dysfunctional and dangerous, perhaps, but a family nonetheless. Riker and the others returned close to dawn. They were bruised, their knuckles were scraped, but they moved with the grim satisfaction of a job well done. Riker came over to her, his face grim. "It's done," he said simply. "You won't have to worry about Donovan again. He's been strongly encouraged to seek new opportunities in a different state. His uncle has been informed that any retaliation will be met with a disproportionate response, Isla looked up at him, her eyes wide. "What did you do?" Riker sat on the edge of the pool table near her chair. "We educated him," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "We explained that what he considers as property, we consider a human being. We made it clear that his actions have consequences he is not equipped to handle." He understands now. The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine, but it was a shiver of relief, not fear. The monster was gone. The cage was broken. "What happens now?" she whispered. "I have nothing. Nowhere to go." Riker was silent for a long moment. "A few years ago," he began, his gaze distant, "we lost someone. A brother. He was saving up, had this dream of buying a little plot of land just outside of town. A place to work on bikes, maybe build a small house. He kept his savings in the club's safe. After he was gone, we never knew what to do with it. It didn't feel right to spend it." He stood up and walked to a massive, imposing safe in the corner of the room. With a series of clicks, he opened it and pulled out a thick manila envelope. He brought it back and placed it gently in her lap. "We held a vote at church while you were sleeping," he said. "It was unanimous. The club is making an investment." Isla's hands trembled as she opened the envelope. Inside were not just stacks of cash, but a set of keys and a deed. The deed was for a small, 2-acre property with a dilapidated barn and a tiny farmhouse. Her name was on it. I don't understand," she stammered, tears welling in her eyes. "This is too much." "No, it's not," Grizz said, walking over with 2 bowls of water and a bag of jerky. He placed the bowls on the floor. "The boys made a run to that alley of yours. Your friends are safe in the garage. Seemed like they might need a place to stay, too." Riker looked at the deed in her hands, then at her tear-streaked face. "That property is yours. The money is to fix it up, get it licensed, whatever you need. We're not giving you a handout. We're giving you a fresh start, a place to build something. For you, and for your friends," he said, nodding toward the garage. "We're calling it Odin's Hope because sometimes even old, broken-down gods and bikers need to believe in something." Isla broke down, not in fear or sorrow, but in overwhelming, gut-wrenching gratitude. She cried for the girl who sold her dress, for the woman who thought she was worthless, and for the future that had just been handed to her by a tribe of leather-clad angels. Months melted into a season of renewal. The dilapidated property, once an eyesore, slowly transformed under the relentless efforts of Isla and her unlikely construction crew. The Serpents of Odin, in their off hours, became carpenters, plumbers, and painters. The roar of Harleys was often accompanied by the whine of power saws and the rhythmic thud of hammers. They rebuilt the old barn, turning it into a clean, warm shelter with spacious kennels and an outdoor run. The small farmhouse was scrubbed, painted, and made into a home. Isla's home. She worked harder than any of them, her hands, once soft and pale, becoming calloused and capable. The hollow fear in her eyes was replaced by a fire of determination. She was no longer a victim. She was a founder. The Odin's Hope shelter officially opened on a crisp autumn day. There was no grand ceremony, just a quiet gathering of the club and a handful of rescued animals. Sage, the old shepherd mix, now had a soft bed for his arthritic hips. Scrappy, the terrier, served as the official, one-eared greeter. Isla stood at the newly painted gate, a clipboard in her hand, directing a delivery of donated blankets. She wore jeans, work boots, and a faded t-shirt, and she had never looked more beautiful or more powerful. The emerald green silk dress was a ghost of a memory, a symbol of a life that no longer belonged to her. Her wealth now was measured in wagging tails, happy barks, and the quiet, steady loyalty of the Brotherhood that had saved her. A familiar, earth-shaking rumble echoed down the road. A long line of motorcycles, more than 100 of them from their own and neighboring chapters who had heard the story, pulled up to the shelter. Riker was at the front, his face unsmiling, but his eyes filled with a deep paternal pride. This was their gift. Not the property, not the money, but this show of force, this wall of protection. They weren't just dropping off a donation. They were making a statement. This place, and the woman who ran it, were under the protection of the Serpents of Odin. Anyone who thought to cause trouble here would have to go through all of them. Riker dismounted and walked over to her. He didn't say a word, just handed her a brand-new leather vest. It was small, fitted for her. On the back was the club's snarling wolf logo. But underneath it, in small, neat letters, were the words, "She feeds the wolves." It wasn't a patch making her a member, but a title of honor. A recognition of her own strength, her own pack. Isla looked at the vest, then at the army of bikers, then at the shelter she had built from ashes. A dog, a young pup they had rescued just last week, trotted up and licked her hand. She smiled, a real, fearless smile that reached her eyes. The greatest gift they had given her wasn't the shelter or the safety. It was the belief that she was worth saving and the strength to save herself and others from that day forward. She was home.